Earlier this week, I shared a story about the experiences my loved ones had at our family home that we used to live in. My first submission, which we'll refer to as Part 1, were the stories of experiences that my dad and mum told me, except the last one, about our old house where absolutely crazy shit happened. So this submission will be about my own experiences. I actually had to sit down and really think hard about this. Now, my memories from then are from 15 years ago, when I was 12 and under, and memories from childhood aren't as plentiful as ones from adulthood. I do remember spooky shit happening all the time, though. There are so many that most aren't even worth mentioning, to be honest. But there are 4 experiences, though, that really left an impression on my young mind. And those 4 are the ones I'm going to tell you now. So, to make a brief recap, the property I lived on was in a heavily forested but populated Western Sydney suburb at the foot of the Blue Mountains. It was an old house, early 1900s apparently, that originally belonged to my grandparents, who bought it from prior owners, 5 acres, and behind it was about 100 acres of bushland forest that was council protected land. I'll refer to this as the 100-acre wood. I'm not sure why it was council land specifically, but it may have had something to do with the mid-1800s settlers' ruins that were spread out amongst it. The house, to cut it short, was haunted, obviously, and it was so common that as a young child, I didn't even know the difference between natural and supernatural. It was just regular life for me. So, with that out of the way, I'll get to the stories. Once again, the first one being the most memorable, and the last one being the creepiest. So, my family were great friends with everyone in the neighbourhood. For my first birthday, there were like 300 people from the suburb that came, and I knew all of the children. There was one friend I had, I'll call him C, that I knew literally since I was born, him being a few months older than me. His mother is my godmother, and my mum being his sister's godmother. He and his family lived about half-hour away, but he was around at least once a week, and we were great explorers and adventurers together. One time, we were playing with our toys out in the west paddock, on the lookout for dead animals. I'll explain that in the second story. We were maybe 6 years old at the time. Right up against our fence, marking our land and the next-door neighbours, there was an honest-to-goodness 1940s or 1950s train carriage on the neighbour's side, just sitting there in the yard, and it was massive. It's actually there still on Google Earth, and I loved trains at the time, and the toys that we were playing with were our Thomas the Tank Engine toys, and we played in that area because it was next to the train. We were doing our thing, being kids, when we noticed that there was a little boy in the carriage, looking through the window. He waved at us to come closer. I thought it was weird at first. I knew all the neighbourhood kids, and he wasn't one of the kids that I knew. We thought that it was cool though, so we went up to the fence. We couldn't hear him very well, but he told us to come inside and play with him. We were a bit hesitant at first, it being a neighbour's property, but C was so remarkably brave as a child, so he convinced me to go on. We jumped the fence and went to one of the doors at either end, the part that connects the other train carriages, like in trains today. It was locked though, and we went over to the window and said so. Keep in mind, these conversations were from 20 years ago, so I can't remember the exact sentences that came out of our mouths, so I'll just give you the gist of things. So, he said,
"I unlocked the trapdoor at the bottom, underneath the carriage."
We went under the carriage, and yes, there was a trapdoor, and yes, it was open. We get inside, and it was one of the coolest moments of my life at that point. There wasn't anything remarkable in there, no seats or anything, not that I can remember anyway. It was just a storage carriage, but that feeling of knowing that you're in some place you shouldn't be, it was really thrilling at the time. You all know that feeling, don't lie. Now, I'm sure you're expecting freaking The Shining twins in the hallway bullshit, but this kid's intentions were pretty pure. He wasn't bad at all. I said to him, "So, are you the neighbour's little boy?" And then he said, No, they aren't my parents. So, you don't live here? You probably shouldn't be here then. Of course I live here, silly. I didn't push the subject. I just left it at that. Won't we get in trouble? Don't worry, as long as you're with me, you'll both be fine. For the next 20 minutes or so, we just played with our toys. He didn't know anything about Thomas the Tank Engine, but he thought it was cool. As I said, he wasn't a bad kid. He was cheeky and mischievous, yes, but also sweet, and I think I remember him being encouraging as well. C was a brave and cool kid, so they traded barbs, but it was always just innocent teasing. There was never any hurt in it. In fact, things went so well that I really liked him in the time that I got to know him. But after 20 minutes of playing, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we hear a sickly, old and twisted voice say,
What are you boys doing in there?
Me and C were like, oh shit, it's the old man from next door. We were sitting on the trap door, but for some reason, C ran for the door at the end of the carriage. I followed him, and surprise, surprise, like earlier, it was locked. We looked around at the windows, the only place someone could have been because there was no one else in there, but we didn't see anyone. We were really perplexed, but I realized just how dark the room had gotten, which was weird because it probably had been around the middle of the day at the time. I looked at the boy, and he was just staring at the other end of the carriage, and no one was there. We just stood there for a few moments, and then he looked backwards towards us, and there was utter terror on this kid's face, let me assure you, and he was trembling. He said to us,
Run! Get out! Run! Run!
And pointed to the trap door. Obviously, we booked it, and all we heard while getting out of that train was angry screaming from this man. Words I can't remember, and frightening words screamed back by the boy. It's only as I got much older did I look back at those memories and considered them paranormal. I just didn't notice the difference between natural and supernatural when I was that young. In fact, I ran to my nan crying. She asked me what was wrong, and I felt so guilty about it, I said,
Nan, I got the little boy next door in trouble.
Those next door neighbors don't have a little boy, Kay. I hope it all turned out okay for that boy. I've said before in the first story I told in part 1 that there was a boy my nan saw in the house just before we left when I was around 12 or so. Maybe he got to leave the carriage and come home with us. I do remember a few times of shenanigans happening, just as mischievous as that boy was. One time, I remember playing hide and seek, maybe with my cousin, when I was around the age I was in the first story, maybe a bit older. I went to hide in the front living room, a room covered in teddy bears and dolls. I am freaking terrified of dolls as an adult, but that was only after I saw that bloody Goosebumps episode with Slappy the Dummy. As a 6-year-old, they didn't bother me though. I grew up with them. I ran into the front living room though, when the voice of a boy, maybe the same voice as the boy in the carriage? I don't know. It was a long time ago, and details are always fuzzy from when I was a kid. And he said,
Over here.
It came from the corner of the living room, behind a couch with dolls on it. I hid behind it, and after a while of my friends and cousins searching, coming in and out of the room, I remember the voice saying,
I think you win now.
Now, memories as a child are only catalogued in my brain because in that instant, something really interesting happened that made an impression on me. I say this because I used to hear voices like that all the time. It wasn't anything new, so that wasn't why I remembered it. I remember it because as soon as I stood up, I felt something in my pants. I looked into my undies, and at some point, I did a massive shit. I don't remember feeling anything. I was honestly surprised. So I guess I know how old inconsistent people feel now. Anyway, I remember hearing the voice laughing and me running into my mum to get cleaned up. Another time there was mischief was when me and C were around 10 or so. We were in my room, fucking around at midnight when my family was asleep. C said to me,
Hey C,
I have an imaginary friend that's real. He's here now. He looks a little bit like E.T. actually." I said, "Prove it." And he was like, "Fine." He led me out of the door and into the kitchen. At the other end of the kitchen was the microwave. C said, "He's in there, right now." The next thing we know, we heard the buttons beep on the microwave. It went to a minute or so and actually started cooking, with nothing inside and no one to manipulate it. At the time, I was like, cool, but I looked at C and remembered that he was just as freaking shocked as I was. So, those were my memories of the boy in the carriage and what could have possibly been him at my house. I now believe things can follow you home. It's happened to me at the house that we've been living at since 2002. The second story is interesting. I mentioned before something about dead animals. That was because, for some fucked up reason, animals of all kinds would come to our land to freaking die. Like, constantly. We would find a dead everything at some point. Possums, rats, rabbits, birds. As we got older, C and I, we had to keep C's little brother around us at all times when we were playing by ourselves, because his little brother, who was 3 or 4 years younger, who I'll call G, would find a dead animal and start playing with its corpse or dissecting it. C and I were convinced, actually, that he was going to grow up to be a serial killer. Less depressing is that we're all adults now, and we turned out perfectly fine. He had to take special ed while at school, but it was only due to learning difficulties, and most surprisingly is that he landed a fucking hot missus. He got major cred points for that, I must say. In fact, it almost makes up for the dissecting animal stuff. Yuck. Anyway, back to the depressing stuff. Dead animals. There were so many times, there must have been an interesting case weekly. I remember one time, there was a flock of 50 galahs, a beautiful pink Australian bird, that just seemed to drop dead in a bunch on our paddock. Disease? Poison? Natural selection? Something supernaturally sinister? I don't know, but it happened. There were always dead possums. Those were the ones that hit the hardest. We could explain maybe the dogs tearing into them, but we never saw that happen once. The one I remember the second most was one time when I was 11 or 12, near the end of our years at the house. Our house had the normal land for humans and dogs to play in, which was about an acre, with a second, smaller house to the east of our own, an acre each on the west and east sides of the house for horses and shit, and another couple of acres on the south side. The south side went down a little bit on an incline to the southeast side, so it looked like our house was on a hill. And down at the bottom, there was a fairly big but not that large muddy pond. It was full of beautiful carp and turtles. I used to spend so much time down there, in fact. But just behind it, further to the south, it went even further down an incline. This is the area I never went to. Honestly, it was just plain creepy, but I didn't know why. Things just seemed more silent there, and I hate silence. This will be important to remember in a minute. This second most memorable instance was about midday when I was just outside of our house playing with the dogs. I looked down and saw something floating in the water. It was black and it had a green bit at the top. I let it go, went on with my business, until a couple of hours later when it was still there, but in a slightly different part of the pond. I told Nan. She thought it was weird, so she got my Uncle D to come down and have a look. We get down there, poke it with a long pole until it comes to the bank, and then I realized with horror what it was. It was a poor black bull mastiff that had drowned in the lake. A dog we had never ever seen before, and it was dead and bloated. It was a really sickly sight, and it probably was the reason why I fear drowning more than anything to this day. Uncle D, however, somehow got it out of the pond without touching it, with a shovel, and then nudged it towards the incline that went down further, where he made it spectacularly roll into the hole he had dug a few minutes earlier. I asked my Nan why he was burying it there, the place that I never went, and she told me that it was because that's where they buried all the big animals that either deserved respect or couldn't be thrown in the trash. She had told me other times, but was much more interesting when she told me this time, how there were other animals that kept going to the pond for what seemed like no other reason than to drown. A kangaroo, a female deer, a fucking cow. That was interesting. The only big animals that we had were horses. The cow was the biggest bastard to get out apparently, and I'm thankful I wasn't around at the time. The only things that seemed to be protected on our land were our own animals. There weren't that many deaths over the years among our pets, and all but one were natural. So, animals kept dying on our property. Who cares, right? Well, this has been leading to the main part of this second story. In the 100-acre wood, the council land that the council didn't seem to care about, there was this massive mound of earth and hard soil. It was used as a burrow, or a warren, for a family of rabbits. Maybe a few families. I don't know how rabbit social dynamics work, because there were maybe a couple of dozen. It was full of holes where the rabbits went in and out. I really loved that part of the 100-acre wood, in fact. I used to sit up not too far on the hill and watch them come in and out and do rabbit stuff. I want to mention just quickly too that there was another trail where there was a cow skull just sitting on the side of the path that had been sitting there for years. We always walked past it, pointed it out and said cool, and then moved on. It was a completely different part of the council land. You'll see why it's important in a minute. Anyway, one day I went out on my daily adventure through the 100-acre wood. I can only think of 3 times anything sinister happened. One time was in the last story of part 1. The other was completely natural, but probably a story for Let's Not Meet. And the other was this time. 99% of the time, it was a peaceful place. I walked down the path towards this bunny burrow, and as I get closer, my blood runs cold. There were dead rabbits everywhere, just strewn all over the place. Maybe between a dozen to 20. Those were the ones just outside of the burrows too. I was absolutely shattered at the time. I loved those rabbits. I got creeped out though, so I had a quick look and then left to tell my mum and Nat. Before I left though, I saw the cow skull that was usually in a completely different part of the bushland, and it was just sitting on a branch on a tree at the top of the mound. I don't remember how it was cleaned up, and my nan doesn't either, if she had anything to do with the removal of the bunnies anyway. Next time I went down there though, a few days later, they were gone, and that massive mound of earth was hollow for the rest of my time there. So, story 3 bends my mind thinking about it. To be honest, it probably belongs in Glitch in the Matrix, but you wanted the stories, so here they are. Toward the end of the years of our time at the house, I had friends over. I had friends over every couple of days, in fact. After school, weekends, the place was really fun. 2 mates were with me, who I'll call S and T. One of the guys mentioned how there were ancient Aboriginal bones discovered at the construction area, a couple of kilometres south. There was a whole lot of construction going on within the suburb after the 2000 Sydney Olympics, and the area where these bones were found was at a sort of quarry, and it became where they were building a big main road that is now there, in fact. It was a bit of news at the time because it shut down construction for a while. To give a brief description, once again, there was our property with the 2 houses, 5 acres. Then there was the 100-acre wood to the south, which was fenced but never stopped us. Beyond that was the quarry area. I told them we could probably go and have a look at the site and see if we can see anything in the distance. They were keen, and it wasn't that big of a walk because the council lands went a few acres south, and the rest to the west in a sort of rectangle that covered the south of a few properties, including our one. We walked down the trail, the one that used to have the skull to the side. We passed the fence marking the end of the 100-acre wood and the beginning of the quarry. Instantly, it was just earth and dry cracked earth. It went for a couple of dozen meters until we got to this sort of cliff. It wasn't as high as cliffs go, maybe 4 stories, but it was enough to kill you if you fell. We're looking in the direction of the scandal going on, but I'm getting a bit nervous. I had a beautiful dog. He was a Shar Pei named Claude, and because he was so roly-poly, it was bad for his health. He was 75% blind or something, in fact. I was scared that Claude is going to get confused and walk off the cliff. The dog always followed me, protecting me, and this is when the story really began. I look behind my right shoulder and see Claude just sitting there, looking out at the expanse. I look back south over the quarry, with S&T talking crap to each other. Seconds after looking to my right shoulder, I hear a scuffle to my left. I look and there, maybe 10 meters away, I see Claude lose his footing, rolling down the top of the incline where it was maybe 60 degrees, and I see him just roll off the cliff. You know that sound when you drop a pebble off of a tall distance to see how far it is, and then it hits the ground? Imagine that, but with your best friend. The silence after the fall and the sound of a body hitting the ground far below, it was gut-wrenching. I just fell to my knees screaming. To this day, I've never felt terror like that, of losing a loved one like I did then. But I can say that I'm really lucky to have that. The TNS, they lose it. Holy shit, dude. And all of that. They go towards the part where he fell to get a better look. I'm just on my knees crying for what seemed like hours. It was only maybe 15 seconds though, because all of a sudden, S said, "Okay, look behind you." I heard the beautiful sound of my dog's heavy breathing, the way dogs of those breeds make, kind of like a pig snorting. I look to my right shoulder and there's Claude. I grab him and hold him and tell him that I love him and thank God so much. The boys were really confused though. There was no possible way that he could have fallen down there and then be up here. Not in 15 seconds, that's for sure. There wasn't even a place to climb up and down for maybe 100 meters. Whatever though, I don't care. I've still got my buddy. Well, after a little while of talking about spooky shit and conspiracies, we go to walk back. We were approaching the fence when I looked back, and Claude wasn't following me. He was walking towards the cliff, in the exact same spot that I saw whatever it was that I saw before. T notices it as well, and we book it towards him, calling his name, trying to get at him. We just make it to him, almost freaking diving, as he starts slipping on the rubble at the top. We grab him, but because of the momentum, he nearly goes off anyway. We have him in our arms and just look at each other like, what the fuck is going on? We drag him back behind the fence and thankfully, he follows us. That was the end of that experience, but honestly, I'll never forget it. It was just so strange. I'm glad to say, though, that Claude lived a long and happy life with our family, and he made the move with us, and he's resting in peace in a nice place now. So, fourth, and the last and creepiest story. This has gotten really long. Maybe I should have broken this up or something, but I want to stick to the format of part one. Once again, it's towards the end of my years there. I'm with my mate S, the other kid in the third story. We've known about the cemetery that our house is almost directly facing for a while now, about 200 meters up the road. Or it might be more. I'm bad with distance and geography. It's a historical cemetery though, and it was used in the 1800s, I believe, and it was the resting place of a bit of a famous historical figure in our parts. I forget his name and I can't be bothered to look it up, but I believe he was a famous explorer of the Blue Mountains. I might be wrong there though, and if you're interested, you can find the correct details with the description I'm giving you if you look for it. What's also there, and the reason why the cemetery is famous now, is Sarah's grave. It's a bit of a local legend in Western Sydney. The story goes that a girl was walking through the cemetery late one night when she was sexually assaulted and murdered. She was later buried there, and if you go there, you can hear her screams apparently. This story must take place before that legend became part of folklore though, because when I was 11 or 12, I never heard it. S and I just wanted to go there for spooky fun and shit. So we ride up there on our bikes and get to the front gate. At the time, it was a cemetery that was still used not too long ago. They still had family members visiting, so the fence was just as easily climbable, although it was a high fence. The gate, though, was a harder climb and bigger, but easier to get to because just between the gate and the fence, there was a small gap that people could get between, and with some maneuvering, we got our bikes through. So fucking stupid thinking back on it, but that's what we did. We're walking through these graves, being loud idiots, but respectful enough not to walk over the graves or damage anything, like sick douches do to tombstones sometimes. It's the middle of the day and we're doing pretty good courage-wise, so we're being loud, when all of a sudden there was a horrifying scream. I'm old enough to realize that screams mean bad, and so was S, so we freaking booked it. We ran to the entrance. S goes first and gets his bike through, and then me next. S looks like he's about to help me because my bike was an utter bastard of a bike. It was for big adults and full of parts that stick out. I take a few seconds to look behind me, look carefully, and then I see what I can only describe as a shimmering. If I had to be more specific, I'd say like the Predator's invisibility cloaking, but not anywhere near that obvious and distinct. It was there though, subtle but oh so seeable, and it was approaching at a fast walking pace. I looked back toward the entrance, expecting S to help me with the bike, but the rat bastard was halfway down the road. He left me. I'm trying to get this bike through the gap, but the foot handles in the middle of the back tyre were getting stuck when I pushed forward, and the pedals got stuck when I pulled back. Once again, I'm lucky to say that I don't really know what it's like to be menacingly chased other than this time, but I can describe it this way. You know how in video games, you're getting chased by a monster, so you book it, and the camera is facing the way your character is running, but you know that there's a fucking giant T-Rex behind you, but you don't want to turn around? Try that, but in real life. I was panicking now. I can feel this thing getting closer. I consider climbing the gate. Do I really want this bike though? Those kinds of thoughts were popping into my brain when I can feel whatever it is directly behind me. I feel cold and all my goosebumps are bumping where they shouldn't bump. I feel this thing's presence lean down to my shoulder, and then there was an earth-shattering scream. It was at this point, looking back now, that I can say I know how a rat feels when it's trapped by a cat, knowing that it's about to die. I don't remember the next few seconds. 1 minute, I'm about to die from my heart popping out of my chest. At the next, I'm on the other side of the fence with a sprained wrist and cuts on my legs. I must have somehow awkwardly climbed over with the bike and leaped through. I'm in fuck this mode, so I'm running to my house until I get to the driveway where S is waiting. I don't remember much of the rest of the day, what we talked about, what we did. But at some point, we made the decision to go back and get my bike. For some reason, Nan couldn't take me. Maybe she wasn't there, so we went back ourselves. We went to the gate, and the bike isn't where it was before. It was actually further inside, leaning neatly against the tree, almost as though whatever it was saying, "Come and get it, you little shit, I dare you." I had to get the bike though. It wasn't that far in. Mercifully, nothing happened. We went in, got the bike, and just left. Thinking on it though, I believe that something paranormal definitely happened out there, and I've certainly experienced things. I've been raised by my mum to have a very spiritual side, I know that. 99% of the time, things out there aren't able to harm you. But I'm no dummy either, and I know a lot of people aren't going to see it the way that I do. Anyway, that's the end of my stories, friends. These 4 are the ones that stand out the most in my mind, and I don't think that there are many more that I can recover from my noggin. Maybe I told my mum or Nan at the time of an experience happening, but I forgot it till now, and they can remind me and jog my memory. If they do, I'll let you know. I did say in part 1 that my mum wanted to tell me more about her own experiences, and if they're good, I'll share some more stories. But I don't want to hype it too much. All in all, maybe all of this can be explained with natural reasons. I don't know. YouTube and Reddit are fond of pointing out carbon monoxide poisoning in every fucking post. But I firmly believe, though, that most of my experiences were beyond natural and can't be explained by modern science. These stories, I can assure you, were true. If you use the clues in my story, in fact, you can probably find the places and see the details to back them up. Google Earth is interesting, if you get what I mean. So, I hope you enjoyed the stories, and I'll get back to you if there's more. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.